everyone, welcome back to the Blues Raga series, and today we're going over the master DNA phrases for the major pentatonic scale. We did the minor phrases in the last video, and we also talked about all the theory of this exercise, so I'm really just going to focus on the phrases in this video. I'm just going to try to show you everything I do in the major pentatonic scale and just give you some real quick pointers for how to do the exercise. Use the description box below. It's the lesson navigator to help you get to the different parts of the lesson. It'll help you jump around between the things you want to work on most. With that, let's get into it. Before you do this exercise, you need to make sure you know pentatonic box number 2 or the major pentatonic root box, whichever you want to call it. I'm usually going to be doing it here on the 5th fret of the little E string. It looks kind of like this. And we're going to be focusing on A major pentatonic. So make sure you know that shape, and also make sure you know what the names of the notes are. Like, you got to know this is A, this is B, this is C sharp, this is E, etc., etc. And you want to make sure you know, if you can, what scale degrees are they. Know that A is the root, B is the 2nd, C sharp is the 3rd, E is the 5th, F sharp is the 6th, A is the root again, etc. Make sure you kind of have a feel for the placement of both the note names and the relative scale degrees in A major pentatonic, because that's really, really critical to understanding this exercise. It's what's going to help you kind of put the licks in the place that sounds the best. So, all right. Yeah, as long as you've got that taken care of, we're ready to get into the phrases. So just a reminder, starting with my middle finger on the 5th fret of the E string and building my box off of that. And we're thinking of this as A major pentatonic. And the first thing we're going to do is we're going to talk about the thirds or the blurs. There's more ways that you can do this in the major pentatonic scale. It doesn't get as tonally complicated as it did in minor, but there's just a few more ways to do the bends, so we're going to go over those right away. We're going to start out with just the root and the 2nd degree of the scale, the A and the B. Just like in the minor pentatonic, you can bend this up, you can blur it up from the major 2nd into the minor 3rd like this. You hit the stable note, the A. When you hit the B, kind of let it sit for just a second, then bend it up into the C. Kind of like bending it up into that note. And when you do it at real speed, it sounds like you're almost moving right away, but in reality, you want to sit on this B for just an instant. So usually when I practice this, I'll start going, I'll give it that second, and you also want to make sure you release the note before, you don't want to release the note from the bend. You want it to bend and then go straight back to the A. You don't want to hear it. You don't want to hear it come back down. So spend a little bit of time to get used to that bend. It's a little tricky, but once you get it, it's a great, great, great effect. So once you're comfortable with that, there's a new way to bend actually in the major pentatonic. You can actually blur this note in the opposite direction now. It's just because of the way that the 2nd degree is a little bit more stable. Like bending down from the major 3rd to the minor 3rd, it sounds a little messy, but if you kind of plop down from the C into the B, it actually works really well. So you kind of got to pre-bend the note. You got to start at the C. You got to find the C first. And then release it into that note, and then resolve down to the stable A. And it's very similar to the upward bend in that the timing can be quite tricky. It gets a little tricky to get used to this, but once you've got it, you just kind of. And it's very similar also to the upward bend in that you don't want to hear yourself going. You don't, for this particular type of lick, you want to be able to separate when you're hearing the up and the down, and when you're just going. So you want to make sure you've got that note bent before you drop it. And you'll eventually get used to doing that quite quickly. So just practice it slowly, and you'll get it. So those are the two trickiest ways to do this, but definitely the most satisfying. Another thing that becomes much more common in the major pentatonic scale is it's kind of rolling back over the fret like that. So we're going from the B kind of up into wherever the C fret is, and then dropping back down to the major second, and then resolving down to the A. Or even just going, just in general, kind of stretching outside of this B into this C becomes a very common thing in the major pentatonic scale. Though I tend to kind of hang this in the major pentatonic scale rather than the minor one, because the B is really the important note in the lick, not the C. The C is kind of what you kind of smear over to get through all this stuff. So the third way to practice this is, you know, like that. I really like to use kind of that arm flick right there. It's a really great way to play it. It's got a lot of muscle to it. It's like you can play it with the you can definitely play it with hammer-ons or with another finger, but I think it's a little more bluesy way to play it. So just a recommendation of mine. And those are the big ways to use the major second. The other way that you blur the third in the major pentatonic scale is with the C sharp. You kind of roll over the fret into the major third and then resolve down to the A. So you're finding wherever the C is, rolling into the C sharp, going back down to the A. And the neat thing about this lick is because it isn't a bend, like the bends are, it's more difficult to define the notes in a bend, but when you're using the frets, it's easier to define the rhythm because it sounds like, okay, here's one pitch and here's another. So this way of playing the blur tends to be more common when you're doing something rhythmic. You know, things like that are much more common with that type of motion. And also, when you're talking about like just the regular third of the pentatonic scale, the C sharp, it can resolve up to. It can resolve down to the A, or it can resolve up to the E. Both stable notes that are nearby that will resolve that little lick right there. So when I practice this, usually what I do is I'll go both ways. You know, and in other parts of the scale, you finger it a little differently, but the general idea is you're sliding from the C into the C sharp, and then either going down to the A or up to the E. And so to recap real quick, the three ways that I do the blur, I usually find the area of, okay, where's the A, the B, and the C sharp? And then I do bend it up, I do the plop, I do the slide, and then I do the roll in both directions. So that's 5 different ways to play kind of blurs in the major pentatonic scale, and it's good to kind of have them all down. The next type of lick that we use here is these chromatic walks. And in the major pentatonic, it tends to be focused on falling chromatically rather than rising chromatically. And we're also kind of moving between minor thirds in the scale rather than major seconds like we were in the minor pentatonic. So the first thing you want to look for is your E and your C sharp. If you have an E right there. The most common motion is to go from E chromatically down to C sharp from the 5th down to the major third. You'll hear the lick that shows up in the Moses kind of combines with the turn we just did a second ago to make a bigger lick. But for now, I'm just focused on just how you get that walk there. So anywhere you have an E and a C sharp, you can do that lick. Or anywhere you've got the 5th degree of your pentatonic scale and your major third, you want to fill that in going downward. You can do it upward, but it's much more common going downward. The next place that happens is between your root and your major 6th. So in this case, it's between your A and your F sharp. And you just walk it down like you did before. Nothing fancy there. Now, you're going to notice that in almost every one of these pentatonic boxes, there's an easy way to play this lick and there's a hard way. And the hard way is usually got to do with crossing the strings, because the string crossing ones are just a little more awkward. If you find the A up here, like the box is technically here, kind of on these frets right here. But to kind of get the notes you need for that chromatic walk, you have to kind of go outside the box. You really got to stretch there. You know, between the E and the C sharp, it's not so bad. You can kind of keep it finger to fret here. You can just keep every finger on one fret and it works out. With the A to the F sharp up here, you got to stretch outside the box in both directions. So it's a good motion to have though, because if you're doing finger style blues, that does show up quite a bit. So just suggesting that you kind of work that in there if you feel you're looking for something more advanced. But if not, you can almost always find a place in every box where it just goes 4 frets down and you're good. The last type of lick that we want to focus on in the major pentatonic scale are these pentatonic fourths. The first thing I want to clear up is that there's a different emphasis in the major pentatonic scale about how the fourths are used. We usually use what I call the major pentatonic fourth, and because it's focused on the major pentatonic scale. And in this case, you have the major second on the bottom of the fourth. We're going between E and A here, the 5th degree and the root. We're going from E up to F sharp, which is a major second, and then F sharp up to A, which is 3 frets there. That's the minor third. So you have the major second on the bottom, and then the minor third on top of that. That's the major pentatonic fourth. And it's just this one lick that's really, really important. You know, when guitarists get to use that hammer-on, anywhere that can show up, that's just a huge, huge cadence in blues stuff. You know, and a lot of times you can, you know, slide into it like that, and that tends to work pretty well too. So anywhere you can find this hammer-on especially, it's really, really good. It happens between the 5th and the root, which is your A, your F sharp, and your E. And it also happens between B, C sharp, and E. Both of these are kind of leading to the stable notes of your pentatonic scale. You know, that first lick's kind of going from the 5th up to the root. This one's going from the major second, the B, through the 3rd, and kind of ends on the 5th. You can still do things with this lick when it crosses the strings. You can go. You can still use it. That's still all available to you, but it's usually a little less guitaristic to do that. So you know, it's good to locate those licks because you'll probably use them for something eventually. But the main ones you want to look for are anywhere you can get that hammering motion. Now, once you've kind of done all those blur licks around the E, the B, and the C sharp, the A, the B, and the C sharp, excuse me, when you're going to move them, they're going to go to the E and the F sharp. And these notes behave a little differently than the ones around the root. When you're trying to stick to the pentatonic scale, you can't do all the things that you did around the root, so we're going to just change the behavior a little bit. If you start on the E, we can still do... We can still kind of bend up. We can still kind of plop down and go back. We can kind of go and do the slide. When it comes to the turn, that's going to tend to want to go down to this D, but this D really isn't in the major pentatonic scale. So I tend to save this idea for later. I mean, you can obviously go, especially if you're over the 4 chord in a blues progression, that's what you're going to tend to do. But when you're playing it just in the major pentatonic scale, for the master DNA exercise, I tend to only resolve this up. You know, so when you kind of slide into the F sharp, I would just go up. So if I'm doing the master DNA exercise on the E and the F sharp, your 5th and your 6th degrees of the scale, I'd do it like this. I'd go upward bend, the plop, the slide, and then I'd go. I'd roll over the fret and resolve up to the A rather than down. Because if you kind of go, you can do that, but it doesn't have quite as strong of a blues effect. This note really wants to go down to that D. So I'm going to kind of save that for later. It's just a recommendation for how to do this particular exercise so that you kind of stay focused on what's going on in this exercise. In other exercises, we start to blend things more, but just a recommendation for now. So if you've been working through these exercises so far, you've probably noticed a lot of your really kind of famous, iconic blues licks. You may have started to notice how some of the core phrases work into them yet, but it may not be totally apparent to you yet. So in the next video, I'm going to go into the details of how all the really famous blues licks you know from the whole history of the blues are really kind of comprised of these smaller licks that I've taught you so far. And then I'm going to teach you how to, you know, play most of the really, really famous licks that have found their way into so many players' vocabularies. And also I'm going to explain just techniques you can use to kind of develop your own licks and just expand what we've done here, going from these 3-note, 4-note, 2-note licks into bigger ones that are still comprised of the really, really core blues material that keeps it really, really inside the genre. But the first thing you want to make sure you do is you master these DNA exercises. You want to make sure you know all 5 pentatonic shapes, first of all. You want to make sure you know the note names and just what the scale degrees are, so you kind of know how it works relatively within itself. And you want to make sure you work the minor and the major DNA phrases into each of them. You want to be able to see the scale from both perspectives. You want to be able to hear this scale and hear it both as C major pentatonic and as A minor pentatonic. When you can really hear the scale both of those ways and use the core phrases and improvisation in those boxes, you've really, really got it. That's really the ultimate goal. And the next couple lessons will also start to talk about how you kind of start to see both boxes kind of working in the same place. When you start to see a major box and another shape that but it becomes the minor box for that particular position. You can blend licks from both the major and the minor pentatonic scale at the same time to just make things really, really, really juicy. That's where this is all going. So yeah, stay tuned, keep practicing, and yeah, we'll see you soon. Have a good one.